I'm honored to welcome the Vice President of the United States and the Second Lady, Mrs. Pence, to Miami. We want to all thank them for taking time from their busy schedule to join us here today. Mr. Vice President, your visit demonstrates the United States' unwavering commitment to resolving the Venezuelan crisis. Your steadfast leadership has focused attention on the Western Hemisphere and all the promise and opportunity our shared neighborhood represents. Ladies and gentlemen, our 48th Vice President and the Second Lady, a good neighbor, Vice President and Mrs. Pence.
Well, thank you, Admiral Fowler. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for your great lifetime of service and leadership in the United States Navy. Would you join me in thanking the commanding officer of Southcom? And to Colonel Azabike, and to all the men and women here at Southcom, thank you for hosting us for this important event in the life of our nation, in the life of this hemisphere. To Secretary Azar, to Mayor Suarez, to Ambassador Vecchio, and especially to all of the freedom-loving members of the Venezuelan community here in the United States of America. It is an honor to be with you all. Captain Diebold, Captain Buckley, and the officer corps and crew who will literally embark on a life-saving mission. It's my privilege to be here at the Port of Miami for the departure of the USNS Comfort, bringing the compassion of the American people to those suffering here in our hemisphere and around the world. Let's hear it for the crew of the Comfort. And allow me to bring greetings, but also gratitude from your Commander-in-Chief, and a great champion of liberty, not only in this country, but all across what he calls this hemisphere of freedom. I bring greetings from the 45th President of the United States of America, President Donald Trump. We're gathered here today because when the USNS Comfort pushes off tomorrow, she will be embarking on no ordinary mission. Her departure from this place will be their second deployment to Latin America in the last 6 months. And we want to express our great appreciation to the incredible men and women who are serving aboard. For the next 5 months, the crew of the USNS Comfort will continue America's effort to bring desperately needed medical care to those in need, especially the men and women and children who are suffering under the unprecedented crisis and oppression in Venezuela. Tomorrow, the generosity and the compassion and the care of the American people for the struggling people of Venezuela will set sail again aboard the USNS Comfort. We are with our neighbors, and we will stand with them with care and strength. It's remarkable to think that for 6 long years the people of Venezuela have suffered under the heavy hand of oppression. Policies of Nicolas Maduro and his socialist regime have shrunk Venezuela's economy by nearly half. In what was once one of the wealthiest countries in our hemisphere, now 9 out of 10 people live in poverty. The average Venezuelan has lost more than 20 pounds through deprivation and malnutrition. Thousands of Venezuelan children are starving, and many are dying for lack of basic medical care. At this very hour, it grieves my heart to say that in hospitals across Venezuela, children are dying. Under the Maduro regime, crime, violence, and lawlessness have spread like a virus. Vicious gangs and notorious colectivos have turned streets literally into war zones. And Venezuela now has the highest murder rate in the world, as more than 70 people are murdered every single day. As Ambassador Vecchio said, this must end. Nicolas Maduro is a dictator with no legitimate claim to power, and Nicolas Maduro must go. But American efforts in the region, the economic sanctions that we've imposed, and the compassion that has sailed and will sail again aboard the USNS Comfort is all reflective of our deep concern for our neighbors in Venezuela. But the truth is, the Maduro regime is not only a threat to the people of Venezuela, it's a threat to peace and security across our hemisphere. The rising desperation in Venezuela has fueled a mass exodus, the likes of which we literally have never seen in the Western Hemisphere. As I stand before you today, more than 4 million Venezuelans have abandoned their homeland, including more than 1 million in the last 7 months alone, fleeing deprivation and fleeing oppression. Today, more than 1.3 million Venezuelans are sheltering in Colombia. Nearly 750,000 sought refuge in Peru. 260,000 have fled to Ecuador, and hundreds of thousands more are scattered throughout Latin America. When Karen and I traveled through the region, we actually spent time at some shelters with families who'd fled the oppression and deprivation, with small children. And we'll never forget it. We talked to a grandmother who told us that her grandchildren in the small town in which they lived, in western Venezuela, that the children were required to get up at 4 in the morning to get a single ticket to purchase a piece of bread at 4 in the afternoon. I remember speaking to a father who'd taken refuge in a border town in Brazil. And he told me as his 2 young boys stood next to him looking up, he said, "It's a very hard thing to come home after a long day and tell your children, we're not eating today." And when their father said it, the 2 little boys nodded with harsh memories of days that they'd lived. I'm proud to report under President Trump's leadership, the United States has taken action. We've positioned more than 500 metric tons of food and humanitarian supplies on the Venezuelan border to help address this crisis. We've provided nearly $260 million in aid to nations that are supporting displaced Venezuelans. But frankly, many of the Venezuelan families need more than just food. They need medical care. In too many cases, their host nations are not able to meet their needs. That's why, at President Trump's direction, we announced last month the USNS Comfort will deploy once again throughout the region of Latin America to address the suffering people of Venezuela. In the coming months, the Comfort will make 14 ports of call in 13 partner nations, providing medical care to those that are suffering, and especially the displaced. people of Venezuela. The Comfort has one of the largest trauma facilities in the United States Navy, dozens of X-ray machines, CAT scan unit, pharmacy unit. Karen and I just walked through the ship and we marveled at its facilities and what it will bring to the region in medical capabilities. And nearly 1,000 extraordinary, dedicated men and women in uniform and those in private and professional life will deploy aboard this ship tomorrow. Many of them will serve as medical professionals in the Navy, but they also include the United States Army, Air Force, representatives of American universities, and several non-governmental organizations. And while this mission will be led by the United States of America, we're proud to report the support of friends across this hemisphere in the mission of the Comfort. The crew of the Comfort includes professionals from Canada, Mexico, Peru, Brazil, Argentina, and Costa Rica, and we thank you for your partnership in compassion. But let me say to all of those serving aboard the USNS Comfort in the months ahead, on behalf of your Commander-in-Chief, you're embarking on a vital mission. We're grateful for your service. You are fulfilling this nation's enduring promise, the very mission of Southcom, to improve public health, strengthen security, and grow prosperity throughout this hemisphere of freedom. And you're doing it at a time of great duress and great challenge, not just for the people of Venezuela, but for what is happening in Venezuela. You're doing it at a time of great burden on many of our neighbors, freedom-loving people across Latin America. To our partners in this hemisphere, we thank you for joining us to give relief to those that are in need. To all the people of Venezuela, and all who call Venezuela home, know this: under President Donald Trump, we will continue to stand strong until freedom and democracy and the rule of law are restored. As we have said before, we say again, estamos con ustedes. We are with you, and we will stay with you until your libertad is restored. So thank you all for being here for this momentous occasion. It's humbling for me to think of those who will embark on this 5-month mission of compassion. The Maduro regime often tries to blame others for the oppression that they've inflicted on their own people. Today, the world once again will see that even as America stands strong for freedom, that we extend the hand of compassion and care to our neighbors. And that compassion and care will sail aboard the USNS Comfort. So God bless the USNS Comfort with fair winds and following seas. God bless the people of Venezuela. Amen. And may God bless America.
We'll now open it up for a few questions from the media. First question over here.
Mr. Vice President, Willard Shepard with NBC here in Miami.
Yes, sir.
Obviously, this ship is going to provide great comfort to people there, and we have many people in our audience here today who have loved ones in Venezuela. In terms of the administrative aspect of this, and you talked about the aid, that's on the borders. Peru took a step the other day in terms of demanding passports and visas, which basically is impossible for those Venezuelan residents to get. What's going on under the Admiral's command and also with state to try to deal with that administratively so that people can get to the aid?
Right. Well, let me say we've been working very closely with all of our allies in the region to make the aid that's been positioned along the border of Venezuela available. But the world saw just a few short months ago when interim President Juan Guaido made an effort to bring aid into Venezuela, that literally the dictator Maduro danced while food and medicine burned on a bridge coming in from Colombia. I want to assure you, and I can ask the Secretary to step up, that we're continuing to position medical supplies and food along the border. We're continuing to work closely with our allies to facilitate the ability of Venezuelans to access that aid. But we're also, most importantly, going to continue to stand with the only legitimate president of Venezuela, interim President Juan Guaido, and stand with him as he seeks to bring that aid into Venezuela itself.
I would just like to comment that let no one fault the government of Peru. They have been unbelievably generous in receiving over, as the Vice President said, over 700,000 refugees of the illegitimate Maduro regime's corruption. Just imagine that. Imagine in Lima, a system already stressed and overstretched in terms of healthcare delivery to their own people, 700,000 additional people flowing into 4 public hospitals. Imagine that stress on that system. So let us thank Peru for what they've been doing, and we are grateful that the USNS Comfort will be going to be able to provide extra support for the care of Peruvians and Colombians and Ecuadorians and others, as well as the Venezuelan refugees. And the United States is working to help bring our Western Hemisphere partners together. One of the steps that we're taking is to help the flow of the Venezuelan refugees through South America. For instance, the universal vaccination card, so that when individuals leave Venezuela and they go to Colombia or into Brazil, they can be vaccinated. Because remember, the Maduro regime and the Chavez regime before, for many generations, has not vaccinated their people. So measles is becoming endemic. Measles, diphtheria, malaria are now being carried and spread with people that have not received basic public health for decades now. And that's what these neighboring countries are trying to do. So we commend the generosity. We commend the welcomeness of all of these neighboring countries that are trying to deal with the largest refugee crisis in the history of the Western Hemisphere.
Excellent.
Next question.
I'm David Rodriguez from Telemundo 51 here in Miami. Good afternoon, Vice President Pence. Welcome to Miami.
Thank you.
Bienvenido.
Thank
My question is, when will be reality the TPX, temporary protection status, for Venezuelans here in the United States?
I know. Well, what I can say is that we've had discussions at the White House about temporary protective status. The objective of our administration is to see democracy and the rule of law restored in Venezuela so Venezuelans can go home to a free nation. I will say that we've been working with members of Congress. I want to commend Senator Rick Scott, Senator Marco Rubio for their efforts in this regard. And we're addressing this through issues related to administration and enforcement. But again, we want to be very clear. The objective of the United States of America is to continue to call on the entire world community to join more than 50 nations in recognizing the government of interim President Juan Guaido, to make it possible for democracy to be restored. But let me be clear. It is the position of the United States of America and our allies that for democracy to be restored, Nicolas Maduro must go. And once he is gone, we believe there can be a pathway toward free and fair elections.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice President. Internal factions in Venezuela are signaling Juan Guaido as the culprit of the United States' lack of decisive military intervention in Venezuela. It is because he has not asked for a U.S.-led military intervention to defeat Nicolás Maduro, or does the U.S. consider that this is maybe not the right time for such an intervention? Thank you very much.
The United States of America was proud to be the first nation on earth to recognize Juan Guaido as the legitimate president of Venezuela. As I said, more than 50 nations have followed. We brought, over the last 2 years, unprecedented economic and diplomatic pressure to bear on the Maduro regime, and we've continued to bring pressure on nations that are supporting that regime. It will continue to do that. All of that being said, President Trump's been clear from early on that all options are on the table. But I can tell you, having spent some time with President Guaido, a courageous young man, and his courageous young wife, Fabiana, having seen them as I did in a visit to Colombia, with Venezuelans who've been displaced by the oppression of the Maduro regime. I saw firsthand the connection that President Guaido has made with his people, the hope that he has inspired, the crowds that continue to come out and take to the streets, despite the brutality of the Maduro regime and its colectivos, the violence that they perpetrate against those who oppose them. Still the people come. And we are going to continue to stand with President Guaido and for the Bolivarian Constitution of Venezuela. That's our commitment. That's our loyalty. But I can assure you the United States of America respects the sovereignty of the duly elected president, the duly elected representatives of the people of Venezuela. That will continue to guide our approach. But we're following their lead, even while we ensure that we look after our national interests in the region. And but the Maduro regime can be confident that we're going to continue to stand firm. And we truly do believe that, as Simón Bolívar said long, long ago, that a people who desire freedom will in the end be free. And President Trump, our administration, and the American people know in our heart of hearts that someday soon Venezuela will be free.
That's the last one.
Hi, it's Syra Honor, WPLG Local 10. Mr. Vice President, you touched on this earlier, talking about other nations. We did see some new travel restrictions on Cuba because of its alleged involvement in Venezuela. What kind of further increased measures can we expect from the administration in regards to Cuba?
Well, using the authority the President has under the Helms-Burton Law, we recently took action regarding foreign investment in Cuba. And we've made it very clear that Cuba and other foreign nations that are standing in the way of freedom being restored in Venezuela need to stand down. Truth is, according to many observers, the Maduro regime is being propped up by secret police and military personnel from Cuba, even as we speak. And it's the reason why President Trump took the action that he took against Cuba. We continue to stand for liberty in Cuba. But our message today is that the outside power that is impacting the destiny of Venezuela today is not the United States, it's Cuba. And Cuba should withdraw from Venezuela and allow the people of Venezuela to restore their freedom, their democracy, and the rule of law. And the United States is going to continue to bring diplomatic and economic pressure to bear on Cuba until they do. We'll talk right after. Any other reporters you can ask?
One more question from a reporter, please.
Good afternoon, Vice President Mike Pence. My name is Pastora Paula Temreiro. I know we are all Christian, and as a son of God, the word God said in James 4:17, if anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do, it is sin for them. What is the response we have as a son of God to respond to God that we have to intervene militarily in Venezuela?
Well, I love that verse. The good we can do, in most respects, we are doing. The United States moving hundreds of millions of dollars and tens of thousands of pounds of food and medical aid to the borders of Venezuela. The economic and diplomatic pressure that President Trump has brought on the Maduro regime, continuing to isolate them in the world community. I met this week with the Deputy Prime Minister of Italy. We spoke first about Venezuela. And the time has come for the European community to stand up for freedom in this hemisphere as well, and to stand firmly with the people of Venezuela. The USNS Comfort, deployed for the second time to Latin America in this region, shows the compassion and the care of the American people. But let me be clear. The United States is going to continue to stand with the people of Venezuela until freedom and democracy are restored. I promise you. Thank you all very much. God bless.
Thank you for coming, everybody. This completes the event. Please stand by for the departure of the Vice President.